Hello, everybody. So in this video, I wanted to discuss something personal that I think has been happening to me. And it's just, I don't know if this has to do with age, with experience, or what is it about, but it's very common to see that meme where it's like Patrick Star was like stupid when he was, and it's like that's you when you're young, and SpongeBob is you when you're like a teenager and like a young adult, and you're hopeful about life. And then you're Squidward when you're older, right? You're grumpy, you're intolerant. And I do kind of feel like I've been more intolerant. Now I'm gonna get into the reasons why I think that is, and I'm just gonna kind of like work my way through this video as I reason also with myself. So I feel like I've gotten more intolerant specifically to problems that present themselves as requests made by other people, right? So think of like your boss. Think of you doing your work and your boss comes up to you and says, "Hey, I need you to work on Saturday," or "Hey, I need you to do this extra thing for me," right? Like something that's not in your routine. That's what I'm talking about. And usually this involves a certain level of problem solving because you need to get out of your routine. And I think that's where I may be struggling with it because I feel like I want to stay in the status quo, right? Like, don't bother me, don't change things, just let me keep doing what I have been doing, right? Which could lead negatively to like decline, right? Because if you say, I've always been doing it like this, but you're not really happy there anymore, it could mean that you are descending, right? That it's declining, that you're getting worse at your job or at whatever it is you're doing, right? Um, why do I feel like this? One of the reasons I can think of is because I feel as though I'm doing free favors for other people and they may be taking advantage of me, or I may be conditioning them to think that they could take advantage of me in the future. So it's kind of like if you ask me to do this and I just say, yeah, I'll do it, it's kind of like if you ask me again, you're gonna expect for me to just be like, oh yeah, like I'll do it, right? Like no problem. Now I'm thinking like, may this have something to do with age, or there are various factors that could play into here. One of them could be age. So when you're younger, you maybe are more able to adapt to different situations, right? So let's say that you have a problem and you're young, right? Like you're in your early 20s, and they say, oh yeah, there's this problem, there's a situation, and you have that, curiosity, enthusiasm, because you lack experience, you want to learn, so you go ahead and do it. You're able to adapt more. Just think of older people, right? If you present them like when the technology boom happened like 10 years ago, and people were like, how do you use this, they would even hold the cell phone like this, right? And like push each like letter with one finger instead of like typing with their two thumbs. So I think the younger you are, the more adaptable. The older you are, the less adaptable you become. That could be a factor. Another thing is, I think the bigger the change, the more you can adapt. The less big, or the smaller the change, the less you can adapt. Right now, think about you moving to a new city, or you getting a completely different job, or starting a different profession, right? You're not going to be able to say, no, this isn't the way I'm used to doing things. No, man, you got to adapt. You have to learn that new system. And you're probably more or less motivated to do so because it's a big change. Imagine moving from Asia to America or to Europe, right? You're going to be like, whoa, I need to adapt. I need to learn all this stuff, right? And I think in that case, it doesn't matter what age you are, you still have to do it. Now, if you're at work and all of a sudden somebody says, or your new boss says, we're going to implement this new program or this new way of doing things, or now instead of doing this to check in, we have to do that, you know, you're going to be like, bro, it's a small change. So you're going to be less tolerant, right? You're going to be more intolerant. You're going to say, no, I don't want to do it, right? That could be another factor. Now, does this, or could this basically affect learning? because that would be a very important thing. I mean, if you're like, by the time you hit 30, if you're like, nah, man, like I'm not gonna learn a whole nother thing, a whole nother career, a whole nother way of doing things. I'd rather just stick with what I know. Then that does really talk about lack of flexibility. I mean, that's a serious thing, because you want to think that you're going to be a person that is always going to be learning, constantly growing, constantly moving, excuse me, but then you see that lack of growth, that lack of learning with certain things, right? Where you're like, like for example, me, I want to get into like making a business, or I want to get into, I don't know, like learning how to invest or whatever. And it's like, or learning chemistry, right? And it's like, I know nothing of those things, right? So I'm not gonna learn this whole another round, this whole this wide range of vocabulary, terms, ideas, notions. Yet I consider myself a person that likes to learn. But you see where like the contradiction or the paradox is, because I like to learn things that I like to just learn more about what I already know, right? So if I like psychology, I'm more than open to hear about some psychologist's latest theory, or a theory I haven't heard about, right, from the past. But if you talk to me about chemistry, it's gonna be like, oh, like since I don't even know the basics, so you would have to start from zero. You would have to start from scratch, right? Are you willing to start from scratch? Are you willing to learn a new activity, to learn a new way of doing things, right? It could be that too, that it affects your learning capacity. Um, Also, it could be because I just think people are dumb and they make mistakes. Now, this idea makes reference to the notion that I tend to be surrounded by people that make a lot of mistakes due to lack of concentration, or lack of focus, or lack of planning, or lack of organization, lack of commitment, and lack of responsibility. So it's like, if someone tells you, hey, could you do this because I made these mistakes? It's also like, come on, you fixed those mistakes. If you made those mistakes, you find a way to solve those. I'm not going to solve them for you, right? And this notion of like, maybe the person doesn't tell you why they're asking you to do something, but just this notion is there, right? Where you think this person probably messed up, right? Did something stupid, was irresponsible, didn't organize this. So now I have to pay the price for what they lacked, right? So I also feel like that's not fair. Um, yeah, and then it says a problem, uh, and solving it means ultimately an inconvenience in your routine, right? And this goes back to like something somebody said. Nobody likes problems, right? Nobody really deep down likes changes. If you're fine the way you are, I mean, change is risk, right? Ultimately. And when you change, it could be for the better, but it could also be for the worse. Are you willing to take that chance? It's a 50-50. I was hearing this conversation. I think his name was Christopher Steele. He's an ex MI6 agent from London, and he was talking about calculated risks. Now, at the end of his talk, they asked this question, and I think it's a pretty good question because I heard it afterwards in another place. You ask people at the end of their talk, what do you want to leave the audience with today? What do you want them to go home thinking about? And he said this. He said, well, I think taking calculated risks, or the moments in my life when I have taken calculated risks, like leaving MI6 to start my business, or whatever, have been the best decisions I have ever made. But he says you can't just take risks, like, oh, I'm just gonna do this and see what happens. Like, I think calculated means that the odds are stacked in your favor, right? That you'll come out on top. That the likelihood that you'll succeed is high, or it's the highest you can get it. I think that's what calculated risks means. That you're going to basically set up the situation so you come out on top and you win and you succeed, right? You could still fail, but you reduce the risk, right? When you calculate it. Now, how do you do that? I don't know. That's kind of a puzzle because you have to take into consideration things that could go wrong and kind of like prevent them and set it up so you're ready for them, maybe in case. Have things to fall back on, have plan Bs and Cs and Ds, right? But I think ultimately, yeah, nobody likes problems. Nobody likes to change, right? People just, like I'm kind of like that. I'm just like, leave me alone, let me do my thing. Because if you're bringing me a problem, a new situation, you want me to do something different, you want me to change, that's an inconvenience in my routine, in what I know, in my way of doing things, right? Which I think is kind of bad, but I also think everybody's like that, right? Now, there are people that live for the moment that are kind of disorganized, and they're always like, they're the type of people that say, I would hate to work at a job where I do the same thing every day, right? And these are maybe people that work in like marketing or advertising or sales, right? And there are people that are always like moving around doing things, right? Different types of things every day, which I think is cool. But I think this ultimately depends on your personality, right? The type of person you are. So yeah, and then that notion which I mentioned, the bigger the problem, the bigger the adaptation, right? And the less the now I'm going to go back to this notion because there's something I want to say here. I want to use an example. So if you have a situation that requires you to make a small change, your tolerance is less. So you're not going to do it, right? Just think about like changing your routine, your diet, what you eat, or going to the gym, or right, like these small things, or starting to do exercise at 4 in the afternoon or whatever. You're kind of be like, eh. But if it's like a big change, like I just mentioned, you move to a different city, you start a new job, you're in a different country, you get married, you get divorced, you get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you break up. Like these bigger changes will ultimately leave you no option but to change, right? You basically have no option because your situation, your context has changed. Now, I wanna I wanna give an example in the realm of workplaces, and this is more specifically with presidents, the people that make great presidents. Now, I was reading that it's very difficult for a president to be good, genuinely good, because the type of, and I think I mentioned this in a video, because the type of environment in which politicians find themselves in are environments that basically require you to be cunning, right? To be kind of like shisty, to be like a manipulator, to be basically very like aware of what you're doing, what you're saying, right? And know how to move the pieces of the chess, sort of say, around, right? So you're not a good person. If you're in politics, it's because you have a certain level, they say, of sociopathy, right? Or psychopathy, or you need to have those skills in order for you to be able to get on top, right? So in order for you to be able to be considered as like the running, the candidate, excuse me, or the president to be, or even to get to the level of being a president, right? Now, in history, we have had presidents, humanity has had presidents in different countries that didn't have a politician's life, right? One of them was like Donald Trump in the United States in 2016, right? I believe it was 2016 to 2020. But another one is also Zelenskyy, right? And the MI6 guy, which I was talking about, Christopher Steele, mentions him as potentially in history, he's going to be remembered as a hero because of his stance against Russia and Ukraine, right? So this guy was a comedian. I guess he was like an actor. He was in some series in Ukraine, and then he was like a comedian. And then I don't know how he ended up in politics, but he ended up becoming the president. And you could see that these people that come from different, that aren't career politicians, like Joe Biden, that has been a career politician all his life, I guess it's kind of like that idea of, imagine you at your job. You've been at your job for 10, 20 years, whatever. You're not gonna you're not gonna be as careful as a person that's just starting out in the same type of job you have. Like, just picture yourself starting that job 10, 20 years ago. When you were just starting your job, you were careful, you paid attention to the details, you were diligent, you were a person that was dedicated, right? That really wanted to, if you were a dentist or a doctor, you really wanted to help people. If you were an engineer, you really wanted to make those machines run, right? Whatever. 10, 20 years later, you're just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't really care, right? So imagine a politician that's been in politics for decades, right? And then they get to be president and they're just kind of like, yeah, I don't really care, right? But imagine a person that hasn't been a politician and all of a sudden they become a politician and they become president. You can probably bet that they're going to try their best, just because of that notion, right? That it's like a bigger change, right? So you really have to put in the work and the dedication. You can't just, get away with making a couple changes in your life. Like, this is radical change, radical transformation, right? Which I think specifically the signs like Scorpio and Aquarius can deal with it. And in terms of Zelenskyy, he is an Aquarius, right? So in conclusion, I just want to say that we have to prepare for the inconveniences because we can't be rejecting all of these inconveniences all the time. And it may have to do something with the fact, I need to think deeper about this, but with the fact that when people when people tell you things or they single problems out for you, you may take that personally, right? You may take that as in like, oh, what, I'm not adequate enough, right? Like, because of the deficiencies I have and I see in myself, you associate those with what the person is telling you, when really what the person is telling you is completely impersonal and general, and it applies to all of the employees or all of the people involved. But you kind of take that personal, like, that's just for me, right? But that's something that I need to see and work on. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think we do have a propensity now as we get older to be more intolerant to problems, or could that change in the future and we can really just remain open throughout like most of our lives? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.